Sprinting is more than just laying down max power. It's better thought of as a well-coordinated dance requiring precise coordination and technique. And lucky for us, it's a dance that can be learned. But by having good technique, you don't need to generate 2000 watts. You can be as effective as Mark Cavendish, who only peaks at 1350 watts. And this will lead you to your best possible power output and speed on the bike. By the way, this is part 2 of a 3-part series on the best way to sprint faster according to science. So if you haven't watched that part 1, I highly recommend that you click on the link up here and watch that first. To kick off our look at technique, let's watch a professional do this. This is stage 1 of the 2023 Region Pays Loire Tour, and we're following Brian Coquard. And we pick up the action in the final kilometre just after the second last lead-out rider peels off with 600 metres to go. This lead-out rider brings him to about 200 metres to go, where he launches his sprint, and you can see that he is really labouring by the end there, but he goes on and takes the win. If I asked you to break down this sprint into separate phases, would you be able to do so? It all happens so fast that you might not even think there are distinct phases in the 10 or 12 seconds of an optimal sprint. And when I first started learning about sprinting, and to be upfront, I sit on the more fast twitch sprint side of rider type more than climber, so I should have known better. But I always thought sprinting was just about jamming it in the biggest gear that I could push, putting my head down and stomping on the pedals. But as I looked into it when I became a coach, it got more complicated. And what I found was less hard rock and more classical symphony of coordination, with each phase building on one another until the crescendo at the end. And in an attempt to give an answer based on common terminology, I went hunting for any scientific work done around road sprinting, and it soon became evident that there are considerable gaps between science and best practice. In other words, I was unable to come up with any articles or paper that discuss road cycling sprint technique. Even studies like this one don't cover technique. So I also looked at track sprinting, and in this paper, I found a figure which divides a 500-meter sprint into 2 phases, the acceleration phase and the speed endurance phase. But I had to take it one step further and look up track athletics sprinting. And bingo, as the 100-meter sprint has traditionally been categorized into 3 main phases: acceleration, maximal velocity, and deceleration. What helps us to translate this information to cycling is the shape of the velocity curve, and it's consistent across sports and performance levels. It's just the duration and the quality of each phase vary from athlete to athlete and sport to sport. So after this search, here are the phases that I came up with from combining data sources from available research evidence and results proven practice. We can divide any sprint into 3 distinct phases: the setup phase, the power phase, and the speed phase. I'm being a bit deceiving here, as I want you to think this more about being ready for the second phase. And yes, you are increasing your power and getting ready to stand, but it can last anywhere from 5 seconds to 5 minutes. But you need to be flexible here, because the sprint may launch at any time. And now we get to the power phase. And the power phase is the real start of your sprint. And in nearly every sprinting scenario on the road, you will be starting at a speed with a high-ish cadence. But this phase is the time it takes to go from your starting cadence to around 100 RPM, and it might only be 3 or 4 pedal strokes. This phase is the snap you see when sprinting, where you get out of the saddle and you start pulling and putting power into the bike. The key is to apply the optimal amount of force possible into the downstroke during the limited amount of time that you have, and this is why you are driving out of the saddle rather than instantly transferring into your final aero position. It's where you start to consider your center of mass, and you want the tip of your saddle to be brushing your thighs. This should give you a balanced position with arms only slightly bent, but holding the tension from the bar across the shoulders and down the other side, just like a deadlift, where you feel like you're trying to break the bar. So you're engaging your arms, your shoulders, your back, your trunk to generate all that power down into the bike. The cue here is when you're pushing down, you are pulling up with that side, and this is why you want a neutral wrist. Here we have old mate Alexander Kristoff showing us his power phase. And let's see what we can tick off here and match to our checklist. Subtle tip at thighs, check. Arms slightly bent, check. Neutral wrists, well, it could use a little bit of work. Heels up, check. And it's hard to see this, but where you are focused on pulling up with the arm while pushing down with the leg and doing this from side to side. And then we get to the speed phase, the phase where all your speed is generated, and you can go from 5 to 12 seconds, and it's where you hit your max power and speed because you're taking all of the power generated in the setup phase and the power phase, and you're keeping the momentum going. And this is done by maintaining tension through the body and holding good form right till the end. Your cadence is climbing here, and this is where you start lowering your upper body to your final aero position. Here, your head stays still and your eyes are locked onto the finish line and only looking down when it's safe. And this is where you start using your aero position and the bike to maximize your speed when you start dropping power. Caleb Ewan describes the original aero position.
When I start sprinting, I might be like in more of a position like this, and then as the power comes off, then I'll start going like down like this.
On top of this, you can start to move the bike from side to side using a combination of momentum and muscle power to carry you through to the end of your sprint. And let's take a look at Nassar Bouani's position in the speed phase. Lowered upper body, check. Eyes are locked onto the finish line, check. Pelvis pulled up a little, check. Here is where we also talk about shifting while sprinting. And basically, coming into a fast road sprint, you will not need to change gears as you are driving through the power and force and then maintaining that momentum. If it's an uphill sprint, you may need to shift. You need to start at a lower speed and then you'll need to change gears as you get going. To put this all together and get a better idea of not only the speed phase, but all of them, let's rewatch that stage with Brian Colcard. Let's do that now and follow Brian through these phases. This time we're going to follow Brian's power in red, cadence in yellow, and speed in green. To set it up again, we pick up the action in the final kilometre just after the second last lead-out rider peels off with 600 metres to go. And Brian is ready and waiting, looking around, set to launch his power phase. And this is where we see when he launches and he moves into the power phase. And you can see his body change. And unfortunately, he's a bit obscured by the camera angle. But we can see in his data file that the power and torque is increasing rapidly with his effort. And then we see the switch to the speed phase, and you can see that the bike is starting to move around more, and he's trying to maintain power and keep the cadence and speed building. As now he starts to work on the bike more from side to side, he is really labouring by the end of this. His speed still is increasing, and he hits maximum velocity on the finish line. Mwah. But I hate to break it to you, even if you master your sprint technique, the truth is you may not have the raw power to sprint for the win or beat your mates unless you put in some focused training on your sprint. And like this sprint technique, it's more than just doing a bunch of 10-second sprint efforts. There is a better way. To learn what this is, watch this video here because when done right, it will build your strength from the ground up and really get your sprint to the fastest ever.